So when the Crips came to be, what actually happened to the gangs that were already existing in the area? Groups like the Slawsons and the Businessmen, did they get absorbed into the Crips? Did they kind of fall away? Did they get busted? What happened to those groups? And then once the Crips were kind of solidified, what kind of happened in the streets once that became a thing?
Well, a lot of them were over 18, and they didn't want to be mixed in with no killing. The things that the Crips and Bloods were doing when they first come was more violent. Not so much, I'm gonna say more violent and extreme, to where they were doing not just like them fighting, going to clubs, fighting police, socially active and things. The Crips and Bloods were doing other things also at this time: kidnapping, bullying, robbing, taking cars, taking life. So they wouldn't have lasted a day getting caught for something like that. So most of them, if they hadn't went to prison, probably most of them went and stayed pro-black, got jobs, and faded on, not away. They still were around. But starting 71, 72, the game changed. And it's turned to where they were usually between the ages of 14 to 17. You could get away. They hadn't changed the laws. It was still rehabilitation. Carjacking, which you get a life sentence for now. Back then, it was GTA. I had 40 arrests by the time I was 18. That was 1975. 14 to 18, 71 to 75. From no arrest. The first night I went to jail, I cried.
Really?
And I was getting out in the morning. Cried all night reading the Archie comic book, but I was right back in jail 2 or 3 days later and haven't quit or been out the system since. Started that odyssey. And so that was the difference when they started in 71, 72, and it left a vacuum for these youths, particularly on the west side. You only had the west side, which was Tookie, the east side, which was Raymond Washington, the Watts, Compton area, Mac Thomas, and Compton, Lil James. These were the faces. But all of them, and 1, 2, 3, all of them dead. That's another thing. At the end of the day, a lot of them died, a lot of them end up in the penitentiary, and some of them are successful. But the majority of the guys, they on their side of town. Like I say, the west side, we never had a loss unless it was internally for the first 2 years. Then when they started Crip on Crip, later on in the 80s, that's when the Crip casualties started really rising. Other than that, it was strictly Blood versus Crip. So at the end of the day, they couldn't do what we were doing. They wouldn't last so long, and they didn't want no part of it, what was going on, because it was just, they didn't want no part of us doing what we were doing. Like I say, in fact, the first murder was the Robert Ballou murder, whose father was the equivalent of Johnny Cochran. He was an attorney, a black attorney, Robert Ballou Sr. His son got beat over a leather coat. That was in March. That was the first time the Crips ever had been heard publicly. They had been underground and in the high schools and on the streets for a couple of years, but publicly, on a local level, state level, that was the first. Then the next murder happened, that was March. I'm 14, then when I turned 15, April, June, the mayor of Inglewood, that's Butts, who you see do the Super Bowl with Snoop, his brother get killed. Douglas Green, where at 15, tried to help him, and he ended up getting killed at a house party, and that was the start of numerous times during my life I've had to witness homicides or discussion.
I've heard you talk before about that kind of murder at the Palladium being one of the first, first times that the public heard the term Crips, one of the first high-profile murders that was kind of reported on, involved with the gangs. That wasn't the first murder that the Crips had done, but was that the first time that the Crips, being involved in homicide
No,
had
that
reached
was
the mainstream?
about the first murder that was linked. You'll hear other stories, oh, somebody had this on or had that on it. No, that was about the first one that was attributed, that you can actually attribute to the Crips and Bloods. That's one of the earliest ones and one of the most famous ones. Then after that, Tookie's sidekick, Buddha, got killed. You had Odie, you had a lot of them that died in 72, starting in 72, up till today. So there was no killing. The killing started, anybody that was there, they're gonna tell you pretty much 1972.
From a lot of my research, it seems like a lot of violence took place over leather jackets. There was a big thing of people stealing leather jackets from each other.
Not stealing, taking them. You could get killed over a leather jacket.
Really?
You could get killed for stepping on somebody, boots. You could get killed for having a perm, where you're getting your pimping mixed up with your cripping. You could get killed a lot of ways. And it wasn't like, I don't want to say it like, people like to brag about that. But like I say, it's no more different when they were fighting over Jordan, no more different than them doing these beefs and raps. It's at the end of the day, it's still somebody's life to get taken. So let's not stereotype one area to where it's still murder.
Yeah.
This just in this area here, yeah, you could get it. And a lot of things, rappers, actors, entertainers, it just then went on and on as they got older. They started, that's what this was about. So yeah, you could get killed. I've seen a lot of them get killed. One guy, because he had on the brim, that's when I was 15. Another one in later on, the colors come in, the Converse, tennis shoes. There's a lot of things. Crip walking could get you killed. There's a lot of things that were going on during the years that end up being trademarks or stood the test of time. But it's really not nothing to be trying to shine or brag about.
Definitely. So another thing I wanted to ask you about, during the 60s and 70s, from what I understand, there was a lot of racial tension in Los Angeles. The Watts riots, a very famous instance of where kind of racial tensions really got deadly and really got very serious. What was your experience, once you'd moved to California, as far as the white communities and the black communities interacting with each other, and as the gangs kind of increased their influence in the area? Was it completely segregated at that time? Were there white people in the community? Did Crips
on the west side, they were white. Don't forget, you got the west side Crips, you got Compton Crips, you got Watts, and you got the east side. In fact, Marv, I told us, probably mentioned that Compton used to be white, so he's old enough to win. On the east side, when I was seeing the gangs, which was when I was all the way from elementary to the 8th grade until I moved to the west side, it was pretty much Hispanic and black. And it's always been a problem there. See, every race has an organization that will kill you, a black because of the color of the skin. Blacks only kill blacks because of the areas that they stay in, they closest. But when I moved to the west side, like I say, first, there was no projects on it. Everything is homes, houses. Most of the children, families over there were mothers and fathers. The marriage rate, unmarried rate was only 5%. Most of them were having kids when they were married, as opposed to now. And you get that, our generation mixed up. We had to sneak out the window. We didn't jump off no porch. We had to sneak out the window so our parents wouldn't see what we was doing. Pushed their car out in neutral and started up to steal it. And we never brought nothing we did into the other side. Nobody I did knew that would do something like that. So once we moved to the west side, like I told you earlier, at St. Andrews Park, that's where almost 80% of the Crips meetings at the beginning would be at St. Andrews Park, and the other 20% gonna be at Sportsman's Park, both of them on the west side. And that's where they started. That started congregating at the end of 71, 72. That's when it was West Side Crips, East Side Crips, Compton Watts, but you also had the Inglewood Crips, which was aligned with the West Side, as well as Venice Shoreline, which was Venice. They also were part of that to where the West Side we stretched. So you could have Tookie, Raymond Washington, and all of them, hundreds of them down at this end of the park. And at the other end of the park, they had a croquet. You'll see the whites playing croquet. You could go into, which is a gym now. Back then, it was a theater. They had plays, Halloween, giant slides, rockets, and stuff like that. In fact, when we mentioned the Ballou murder, all of them that were involved and got convicted come from this area. They arrested quite a few of them at this park where they jumped off the roof. They used to have a section where you play caroms, golf, and all that, ping pong for the whites. And the ones that was involved, Judson Baycott, Robert Ballou, who was the victim, Sam Cunningham, Ricardo Sims, those were some of the first guys ever convicted for murder when it came to gangs. They are the first ones ever convicted for that.